This was about 8 years ago. I was 21 then. My brothers and I would always go fishing all night by the river and have a blast. The night of June 2014 changed us forever, and sometimes we would still talk about what happened to us. This was a camping trip that we planned next to the river. We were fishing for sturgeon because sturgeon would come up the Sacramento River during this time of the year. The place we decided to camp at was a little hidden fishing spot on the Sacramento River, located in Knight's Landing, a small and quiet town. This spot was a sandy bank shore, and you have to go through an open field off the road and a small forest, about a 10-minute walk to get to the river bank. We were a group of 4 and planned an overnight trip. We packed enough food and beer to enjoy on the bank. We got there early in the morning and fished all day long. We caught a few fish and were buzzed from the beer. It would have been a great time if it wasn't for what we saw when it got dark. It started to get dark, so we set up camp and had a fire going. The sun went down and the bright moon popped out. You could see the outline of the trees and everything. We were fishing with the campfire next to us, and then suddenly, my brother realized it was quiet, too quiet. At this time of the year, you would hear crickets and frogs, but the thing was, we didn't hear them at all. I thought this was weird, but we all just shook it off. It was nothing because the area we were at was sandy anyways. I happened to check the time, and it was 2:58 in the morning, and we were fishing with the fire lit very bright behind our backs. I remember talking to my brother about this girl I was talking to, and out of the blue, we all heard a loud splash on the other side of the bank. We thought that was weird, and it kind of spooked us too. But again, we just thought it was sea otters because otters always make loud splashes. About 20 minutes after that, we decided to just set out bait for sturgeon and head back to camp. We were chilling and having a fun time talking. Then out of the blue, my oldest brother saw a lady in yellow, drenched in water. She was walking up to our camp. Now at this time, all of us got scared because we were isolated from the rest of the people. I think I pissed my pants when I saw her. My older brother was a friendly guy, and so he invited her to our campfire. My brother was asking questions, but the woman kept her eyes on the fire and remained silent. I got a good look at her face. She was Caucasian. Her face had a ghostly look and her skin was pale white. She had dark hair, but they looked old and dirty. The yellow jacket that she was wearing was torn and dirty, like old clothes that's been outside for years. The most creepy part was that she had on the big jacket even though it was summer. I knew something was off, so I told my brothers I needed to grab something from the car. My younger brother and I both went back. We weren't just walking, we were running. 5 minutes after we got back to our car, we saw our other brothers running towards us. And all of a sudden, the wind picked up like a storm, and then there was a crazy high-pitched sound. Suddenly it all stopped, and everything went quiet. And then we heard the lady telling us not to leave her alone. We all jumped into the car, and took off heading to Woodland and decided to get a hotel there. The next day, we went back to check out the spot. All of our stuff was everywhere, but there were tree branches and leaves everywhere. Our little campsite was a mess. We grabbed everything that we could grab and left. On the way back home, my older brother told us something that I could never imagine. He told us that after we left, the girl began to mumble words in weird languages, and then she spoke in our dialect. My brothers got up real quick and saw that her eyes were getting white, and blood was dripping out from her eyes. He didn't say anything and jumped out of his seat and ran to us. While running, he turned his head to see that the girl was chasing him with her big yellow drenched coat. After passing the forest end, the girl stopped chasing him but instead shouted a dreadful scream. This was something I would never want to experience again. Ever since this encounter, we never went back there. That place was known for the hanging of African American back in the day, and also a place for witchcraft, but it was all a rumor. It was just all a rumor.
It was just all a rumor. Story 2.
When I was growing up as a kid, my grandparents and uncles would take me and my cousins on fishing and camping trips. I remember way back when I was a kid, we would always go camp at El Dorado National Forest. We were out camping during the summer of 2006, and I remember overhearing the old folks talking about a haunted campsite located in the national forest I mentioned. I would hear them talk about how a young lady got sexually assaulted and murdered there. So every time someone goes and camp at the place, she would haunt them. When the story was going on, I overheard one of my aunt's friends say, "You know that campsite is only a couple of campsites away. They say if you camp near her site, and you speak of her death, she will come and haunt the site you are camping at." During this night, we were literally 5 campsites away. As the night grew cold and quiet, everyone retreated to their tents to rest up for the next day. That's when the strange things started happening. Now, for those who go camping, you know that you always bring at least some type of protection. I was not sure what time it was, but it was pitch black and super quiet, like dead silence. You know how you can sometimes feel the shift in the air, and know that something is going to happen. That's how I felt when I woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. I woke up my grandma and asked her to tag along because I was scared. As we were coming out of the tent, we saw a lady standing behind a log a couple of feet from our tents. Her back was facing towards us. My grandmother asked if the girl was up taking a leak as well. The girl replied yes, in a slow and deep voice. Now, as a little kid, I was thinking how she was such a weirdo, sitting outside in the cold and dark by herself. Now that I think about it, I should have known better. We proceeded to the woods to use the restroom and came back. As we were walking towards our tent, we heard sobbing coming from the other campsite. At that very moment, I remember about what the old folks talked about earlier, and how our campsite was not that far from where the lady was murdered. In my head, I was so terrified, but my grandma was by my side, so I felt a little better. My grandma grabbed my hand and quickly walked to our tent. She literally threw me into the tent and she said a prayer, then told me to go to sleep. I was asleep for maybe 5 to 10 minutes when I heard someone walking around outside. At first I thought it was my cousins, but as the shadow went across my tent, it got super cold. It felt like I was laying under a blanket of ice or something, and then a sobbing and weeping sound started playing outside near my tent. I laid there so scared that I nearly pissed myself. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow drifting towards my tent. The shadow got closer and closer, until she stood right outside my tent. I couldn't move nor speak. I couldn't even blink my eyes, because I was so scared. Next thing I know, it started to fight with the zipper, like it wanted to come in. I laid there staring at the tent's entrance, listening to it to the quiet sob and weep. I started praying for it to go away, and tucked myself under the blanket. All of the sudden everything went silent. I stayed under my blanket listening to see if it was still there, and then finally I saw the daylight peeking through the treetops. I threw the blanket off me and woke my grandma up. I told her what had happened. My cousins and uncles were all up and everyone had a story. My cousin was telling us that while he was asleep in the truck with the dog kept growling at the window where we were sleeping. He felt the dog knew someone was there, and all he could hear from outside the car was footsteps around his car. He got up and saw my grandma and me. At first, he thought the footsteps were us, but the footsteps were still heard when we went inside the tent. Everyone heard of the footsteps, but they all thought it was the dog. My uncle also saw a shadowy figure pass by his car many times, and as soon as it passed by, it really got cold in the car. Every time he would try to get up to go and check, but the dog kept getting in his way. It was like she was telling him to not go outside because it's dangerous. He just laid back down and the dog stayed hovered over him to protect him. One of my aunties who mentioned the haunted area said she had a dream that she was running through the dark woods. It was really dark and cold. She could hear a woman sobbing from a distance behind her. She said every tree she passed, she saw a young woman standing with her face in her hand crying. One of my uncles who also mentioned the area said that someone kept throwing sand at his tent. It was during the middle of the night and he heard sand hitting his tent. He got up and his tent started shaking violently. There was a little wind that night, but not sure if it's the place he set his tent that was more windy or if it was something else. It was a scary experience. If you don't believe me, then go check it out for yourself. Everyone, and I mean everyone at my campsite, experienced something. If you do decide to check it out, good luck and make sure you don't bring her home with you.
Story 3.
After college, a couple of my college friends decided to have a camping trip to celebrate. There were 12 of us on this camping trip, and I knew half the folks who were going. We headed up to a cabin camping site in northern Minnesota, almost to the Canadian border. It was around 5 in the evening when we got there, but we all decided to go for a little hike to stretch out our legs. After unpacking some of our gears and some food, we headed off into the wood. There was a hiking trail that was 4 miles, and we figured we'd be back in time to cook dinner in no time. Needless to say, we didn't know there was a thunderstorm that came through the area 2 weeks before and washed a couple of the trail signs. Instead of following the right trail, we actually followed a deer trail and led us deeper into the woods. It was getting dark, and we decided that it was probably easier if we stopped and spent the night there, and besides, it would be a real camping trip just like back in Laos. Most of us brought blankets and food, so it should be fun just camping out like this. This one guy pulled out a whole boiled chicken from his bag and thought it was funny if he could do something to get the girls' attention. So to our disbelief, he thought it was funny to call the ancestors to come and eat the chicken with him. "Oh, grandmothers and grandfathers, please come and share this chicken with me. I know you're hungry, so please come and have this chicken. I welcome you all to come eat with me." That scared the heck out of everybody. Some people got scared while others got really upset. I wasn't a big believer in this, so I just sat and observed from the side. After the whole incident died down, we all decided to grab some sleep. We decided to have 2 people up at all times just to make sure no wildlife would come and bother the group. The first shift was 2 guys, and they just sat up and talked until it was pitch black. It was around 11:30 in the evening when they started to hear something strange coming from the trees next to our campground. Whatever it was getting closer to the campsite, and the 2 guys on guard were getting scared. At first they thought it was a deer, but as it got closer, they realized there were 2 figures. It was about 50 feet away when the 2 figures stopped and didn't move anymore. One guy had a flashlight and decided to point at them to see what they were. He told us later that he regretted flashing his light at the figures. What they saw was so horrifying, and they both just froze where they were at. There were 2 kids in dirty, ragged Hmong traditional clothing, staring back at them. The weird noise that they heard was actually the bells that these kids wore around their necks. The scariest thing of all is that their eyes glowed green when the flashlight was shined on them. As soon as this happened, the 2 figures turned around and walked back into the darkness. The 2 guys on guard were so scared that one even peed on himself. They were pretty smart, so they decided that it was pointless waking up the others that night. They both decided to stay up because they couldn't fall asleep anymore. The next morning around 6 in the morning, we all woke up and picked up all our gear and moved out. We finally found the way back to our cabin, and that was when the 2 guys on guard decided to tell us everything. They told us exactly what they said. They said it was so scary and haunting that they couldn't fall asleep. They didn't tell us last night because they didn't want to scare the rest of us, especially the females. 2 of the females started to cry because they said that they had really bad dreams last night and felt that someone was walking on them and jumping next to them the whole time they were asleep. They thought it was one of the guys playing a trick on them, but everyone was asleep when they woke up to it. Most of us knew each other, so we wouldn't be doing stupid tricks like that when out in the woods. A lot of the folks in the group blamed the guy who waved his chicken around the night before. We decided that it was just better to go home and forget about this. We packed up our gear and headed out. It was a short camping trip, but the most memorable one I have so far.